Welcome everyone to where, when and how to collect firewood for domestic use in all states and territories of Australia. My name is Kaylee Meo and I'm the creatrix and stewardess of Zap Studio, where you can learn all kinds of useful skills, but particularly those that are being lost as our population ages and we become more urbanised and less inclined towards doing things for ourselves because we no longer have to as a matter of survival. I need to start with an apology because the Zap in Zap Studio stands for Zombie Apocalypse Preparedness, which seemed like a really great joke in early 2018 when I started the business, but I didn't think that we would have so little time before we had to actually upskill for the plague arrival. So many apologies for that. I grew up in the country on a hobby farm where my mum was definitely the driving force for all of the daily tasks of farm living. She introduced me to permaculture from a very young age, and I remember reading Bill Mollerison's book, Introduction to Permaculture, when I was about 8 years old, and I've been thinking about system design pretty much ever since then. As many rural kids do, I moved to the city for university and lived and worked there for about 10 years before I was thoroughly sick of urban life. But in that time, I did meet and marry my husband. And when I suggested that we buy a farm and move to the country, he suggested buying an olive farm because his dad was an Italian migrant. And so we started from there. We moved out here to Central Victoria in about 2007. And I started sharing my stash of useful skills in various workshops in 2017 on an ad hoc kind of basis, and then started Zap Studio as a business in 2019. If you're interested in a comprehensive list of workshops and topics that I cover, you can download the useful file from my website, and I'll pop the link in the chat box at the end of this presentation. My aim with Zap Studio is to empower people with practical knowledge and skills while encouraging them to engage with learning in a safe and friendly environment. Many of my courses were initially aimed at women because there seems to be some sort of feeling that women can't or shouldn't do practical things. So many were actively discouraged from acquiring these skills in early life. But actually everyone is welcome to the workshops and the information because I think that they are really useful skills that more people should have. And I encourage everyone to keep learning all through their lives. But that's enough about me. Let's get started with the information you're here to learn. Today's webinar, as I said, is on the when, where and how of firewood collection for domestic use across Australia. We're going to present the states and territories in reverse alphabetical order because I'm a Victorian and I'm biased, and I get sick of always coming way down the bottom of the list. Also, by presenting in this order, most of the tricky rules and regulations will be covered first, and the simple states and territories can be addressed fairly quickly at the end of the presentation if we run out of time. If you have a question as we go along, please feel free to put that in the chat box, and hopefully we all know how that works by now, and we will get through those as they come up at the end of each slide. So to get us started, I'd love it if you can all share where you're from in the chat box, and then I'll know which bits of the presentation to really focus on. But I'd like to start this webinar by covering some information that applies to all states and territories with specific collection seasons. Seems like we have mostly Victorians. That doesn't surprise me in the slightest. If the first date of collection period falls on a weekend, be prepared because you will go out to find the forest resounding with the incessant buzz of chainsaws when you get there. Serious collectors like to get out there very early in the season for the larger diameter logs. If the season opens during the week and you can take time off from your usual activities to go collecting, I do actually advise that it's worth to get some of the larger logs for overnight burning. Alternatively, some of the more remote collection areas may offer better sized logs further into the season, particularly if you are prepared to go a little bit off the beaten track and further into the bush. This advice applies, of course, to all states and territories where firewood collection is available, but especially Victoria and New South Wales due to the population density in these states. And also there could be a potential shortfall of firewood due to the Black Summer bushfires of 2019-20. The other point that applies in the collection areas is that whatever firewood you collect yourself will likely need to season for at least 12 months. So getting the smaller stove or kitchen wood, as I like to call it, is not necessarily a bad thing because it will dry much faster than the larger logs, particularly if you leave them before you split them. So today we're going to cover collection season dates for various states and territories, accredited training requirements where those apply, permit requirements and collection limits. Again, not all states and territories have them. Environmental care procedures, which are best practice across all states and territories, occupational health and safety considerations, of course, and local state and territory rules and regulations, because they do vary quite considerably across Australia. So, starting with Western Australia. When you search for firewood collection WA in Google or your preferred search engine, you'll get the information from the state government's Department of Parks and Wildlife, which is the website listed at the top of this slide. The branch in charge of issuing maps and permits for firewood collection is the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions, the DBCA, and their number is also listed there. Collection areas located in the Perth Hills will require a permit to access them. This is due to the high frequency and convenience of location for collection for Perth residents in these areas. In 2022, the permit fee is for the summer season, $11, which runs from the 1st of November to the 30th of April. And then for the winter season, $22, which covers the 1st of May to the 31st of October. Permits can be obtained by calling the DBCA offices, but do keep in mind that their office hours are Monday to Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. only. So do keep that in mind if you want to apply for a permit. Any permit that you purchase is valid for one collection visit to the forest and must be used within 4 weeks of the expiry date or by the end of the season in which it was obtained, whichever is closer. Because of the removal limits over time, so you can see there the points towards the bottom of the list. Between the 1st of June and the 31st of September, the maximum of 1 tonne may be removed every 60 days. And between the 1st of October to the 31st of May, a maximum of 1 tonne can be removed on any one occasion. Those dates obviously don't line up with the summer season, winter season period. So if you consider that and you do a bit of maths, you basically get 2 opportunities to remove 1 tonne of firewood in the summer season, and you would need to pay the same $22 to do that as for a single tonne that you could collect during the winter season. So it actually makes more sense to plan ahead where possible, and you'll get your firewood a bit cheaper if you collect that during the summer season. For those of you who work in cubic metres, the limits that are applied to that, so 1 tonne would be about 2 cubic metres per permit. Now, you can see there that some areas are listed as disease risk areas. This is because of some fungal and bacterial diseases that appear in the forests on the trees, and the Department of Parks and Wildlife are trying very hard to limit the extent to which those diseases are spreading. So if you're collecting in a disease risk area, there are specific instructions that you need to follow, but you can find them on from the second link there. I will be sending out a copy of the slides to people who have registered for the webinar, so you'll have those links available to you from there. Collecting firewood on public land in Victoria is actually subject to the most rules and regulations, but these are also implied in most other states and territories, so that it's well worth noting what we're going to cover here. Victoria does not require you to have a permit to actually collect firewood, but yeah, it's weird because they have the most rules and regs about what you can and can't do, but you don't actually need a permit to do it. The areas of state forests that are open each season do change though, so you'll always need to check online before you go collecting. And because of the slow growing nature of some forests, such as the river red gum bushes along the Murray, some collection areas are only open to local residents of a particular shire or council area. This collection restriction has actually been extended in 2022, so that only residents of many of the Central Victoria Shire and council areas can collect firewood from the state forest within those boundary areas. So for example, we're in the Shire of Campaspe, we can collect along the Murray. because the Campaspe Shire borders all the way up to the Murray. We can also collect in all of the state forests within the Central Victorian restricted zone. But if you live, for example, in Gippsland, then you can neither collect along the Murray nor in the Central Victorian collection areas, which is quite challenging for people down Gippsland Way because, of course, that was some of the areas greatly affected by the Black Summer bushfires. And also there's a fair few people out that way who do rely on wood for heating. So it can be a little bit challenging. However, whether or not you're able to collect firewood from the roadside verge also varies between local council areas. So make sure that you check with your council before you head out. In all council areas, whether you are allowed to collect on the verge or not, you're not permitted to collect along the side of any road that's managed by Vic Roads or Regional Roads Victoria, which are those designated by an A, B or C number, such as the A1, the B75, the C743 as examples. These roads are considered too busy and often have very narrow verges and are therefore unsafe to collect from because the people driving past tend to go 100 k's an hour or more, and so not a lot of space to clear those. When you go to the Forest Fire Management website, as shown on the screen, during the open wood collection period, so from the 1st of March through to the 30th of June, which is the autumn period coming up, or from the 1st of September to the 30th of November, the spring collection season, you can search an interactive map to find your local collection area. This link for the map is found in the section titled when you can collect firewood, and it only appears during those collection periods. So once you've found your most convenient and permitted collection area on the map, clicking on the pin for that location will bring up a dialog box that shows you information about whether there are any planned burns for that area, if you'll need a four-wheel drive to access the collection area, and also a link to download a PDF map of the area you intend to visit. The additional information regarding four-wheel drive access and planned burns is also published on the map PDF file. The document that you download is a 2-page PDF. The first covers the map and the planned burns information. The second page is a copy of the rules and regulations for domestic firewood collection, which are basically outlined on this slide. But it's a good idea to have a look at that second page because it's a smaller version of the signs that you'll see in the forest coops when you go to collect the firewood. So they post the same information on the edges of the collection areas so that you know this is when you have actually reached the collection area to go and find that wood. Now, on the Forest Fire Management website listed there, you'll also find a link to the Avenza app. And this app helps to actually pinpoint your location when you're out in the forest. If you have your GPS location on your phone switched on and you download the firewood collection area PDF to your phone, you can open the PDF in that app and it will actually track as you approach the firewood collection area so that you know exactly when you have reached that collection space, even if you haven't seen the signs that are posted to say this is where you need to be collecting from. So it's a pretty handy app to have. The management of Tasmania state forests has been outsourced to Sustainable Timber Tasmania. Now, whether that's a company that's run by the Tasmanian government or not, I'm not sure. But all Tasmanians are required to purchase a permit for timber collection, and you also need to pay for the amount of wood that you collect in relation to that permit. So the permits come in 2 types in Tasmania. You can get a seasonal gatherer's permit, which in 2022 will cost you $44 or $33 if you have a concession card, and includes the collection of up to 15 cubic metres over a 3-month period. However, that 3-month period, you can only get a permit for a gatherer's permit between November to April. So coming up to the end of that period. Now, outside those dates, a standard permit is available, which costs $11 and is valid for a month, but collectors must nominate how much wood they will collect in that time and pay an additional $5.50 per cubic metre with a minimum of 2 cubic metres per issued permit. So if you get a gatherer's permit, then you can collect, as I said, up to 15 cubic metres over a 3-month period. The standard permits are determined by how much you nominate at each time. So you can collect a total of 30 cubic metres of firewood in any 1 year, which can be up to 15 standard permits if you just get 2 cubic metres at a time, or 2 gatherers permits. So be sure to check that there aren't any other conditions of purchase, or if anything changes from season to season, because sometimes that information is updated. And you can do that through your regional office as listed on the website at the top of this slide, just to double check those conditions when you do purchase your licence. You can also purchase the licence online as well. So I would also recommend checking back over the Victorian collection rules for good collection practice guidelines, because they will apply in all states and territories as well. To collect firewood on public land in Queensland, you will be required to meet all of the minimum certification standards of a commercial logging operator. This includes certification in the units listed there that cut materials with a handheld chainsaw, apply occupational health and safety regulations, codes and practices in the workplace, and follow environmental care procedures, which are all nationally accredited units. So you can study those in any state in Australia, and they will carry across if you end up collecting in Queensland. You also need to purchase a permit from the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, which you can see the website there, but it's actually easier to give them a call on the number listed and actually talk to a human to organise that. They'll be able to suggest the best permit option for you, but the minimum cost in 2022 is $20, which entitles you to collect up to 2 tonnes of wood, which is roughly 4 cubic metres. But the cost of that permit obviously varies depending on how much wood you actually want to collect. Alternatively, if getting certified seems like a lot of work and you don't have time or inclination to do that, many of the sawmills that do operate the commercial logging enterprises from the Queensland State Forests, allow people to bring a trailer to their mills, and you can load up with offcuts of sawn and dried timber, which may be a much cheaper and easier option. So collecting firewood on public land in South Australia is actually not allowed where state forests are, and so local councils may issue permits within their boundaries, but if you don't have one and you are collecting firewood without a permit, then you can get up to $1,000 in fines. So the best policy there is to find somebody who actually has a farm or land with trees that they want to clear or clean up if they're deadfall, and then you can collect on private land. Obviously, if you are collecting on private land, the same common sense rules apply as outlined on the Victorian slide. You could take into consideration biodiversity, safety, and all those sorts of things. In the Northern Territory, the parklands are actually national parks, and you cannot collect firewood in a national park to take away and burn at home. You can only collect what you need while you're actually camping in the national park in a designated campsite. So basically you can't collect firewood in the Northern Territory. However, some local councils may issue permits within their boundaries for firewood collection. And again, best policy is go and make friends with somebody who's got some spare trees. But having said all of that, I don't know when the last time somebody actually needed a fire for heat in the Northern Territory was. I've never actually been there myself, so I know it gets a bit damp, but I don't think it gets all that cold up there, so good luck. And like Tasmania, State Forest in New South Wales, management of that is actually outsourced to the Forestry Corporation of New South Wales. Again, not sure whether that's organised by or run by the state government, or whether that's an independent body. But firewood collection in New South Wales does require a permit, and in 2022 the cost of the permit will vary somewhere between $8 and $30 per tonne of wood, and that depends very much on the location where you're collecting and whether or not you have a pensioner card. So again, because different locations will allow you to use the permit for different amounts of time, from a few days to a few months, and there will be obviously some ramifications from the Black Summer bushfires of 2019-20 again. You may have great difficulty in sourcing firewood that is actually local to your area. And you may also need to be prepared to pay a lot for that firewood if you can get a permit to collect it, which is why the variation in the cost per tonne, basically. Now, having just said what I said about national park firewood collection, New South Wales is actually the only state that allows some collection of firewood, but it's specifically river red gum from national parks. And this option is available to some local council residents who have the appropriate permit with some conditions. So you can only go and collect river red gum from April until September, for 1 month from the date of when your permit was issued. You can collect up to 6 tonnes per permit, but that keeping in mind that you can collect up to 6 tonnes per household per annum. So you get 1 permit and you've got a month in which to collect that 6 tonnes, which is roughly probably 12 6x4 trailers. This permit is only available to residents of the New South Wales Riverina district, and they can only collect in the Murray Valley or Murrumbidgee Valley National Parks, or the Balranald and Murray River Shire residents who can collect in the Yanga National Park. And again, it's only for that river red gum. So there's a lot of information on that bottom link there about where and when you can collect and that sort of thing. So I do recommend that you check it out before you go collecting, because there's really no excuses if you get caught by one of the forest rangers. So the ACT, also being a territory, not a state, we have only national park in the ACT. And so if you are caught collecting firewood there, which is illegal, it's a $7,500 fine, which makes for a very expensive load of firewood. But you can purchase wood from commercially licensed vendors who do collect firewood, but there's a real push to actually phase out wood heating in the ACT, particularly in Canberra, because of their clean air policies. So there's actually a wood heater replacement scheme instigated in the ACT. You can find out more information about that from the link at the bottom of the slide there. So that pretty much covers all the states and territories of Australia. I know we said we'd take a bit longer than that, but it's pretty straightforward information really when you get down to it. If you would like to provide some feedback, I would love to hear from you on that email address as provided there. And if you've enjoyed the presentation and you're interested in taking your learning firewood collection to the next level, I do have an online and in-person workshop on the safe use and maintenance of chainsaws for absolute beginners. It covers 9 modules from personal protective equipment, also known as PPE, to how to mix and store fuel for 2-stroke engines. We do also cover battery chainsaws, and how to stand and move your body and techniques and that sort of thing for the safest way to cut fallen logs, which is what most people will be collecting in terms of firewood anyway. So you can purchase that through my website as well, and that link for the website is www.zapstudio.online. So www.zapstudio.online through the shop there. And I hope you have enjoyed this webinar. Thanks very much.